Go on, fellows. This is Rick, and this is your seat at the table. And I hope to find this on a beautiful Saturday morning as I'm producing this. Is about 50 odd degrees in the mid 40s to early 50s, I guess, today. Sun is actually out for the moment, but they're predicting rain later and possibly snow later in the week. And I just put in part of my garden. Oh, got April and May, April in Iowa. This is Northern Mirkwood, the Wood-elves realm, based on J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle Earth and detailed in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings from Iron Crown Enterprises. This is one of the earliest additions to MERP. When they first put MERP out, you can see these were the first series of books that came, or the first ones that came out relatively early. This one here was, let's see, produced in 1984. Year of my last year in high school. And technically, I graduated in '85, but I graduated midterm of my senior year. So anyway, that last semester in the spring of '85, I was working a job. Copyright is 1983. I stand corrected, but 1984 is what it says on the back. So I guess they can't make up their mind which is what. Anyhow, we got notes of Middle Earth series, how to use it, definitions, Middle Earth campaigns, and creative, and how to adapt it for pretty much any game system you wanted to use at the time or even currently. This is one of the things that makes the MERP system timeless. It really is. I mean, you don't need the hardcore rule book. If you're a fifth edition Dungeons and Dragon advocate or a Pathfinder, you can easily modify any of these game modules and adventure source books to fit into those mechanics. It would be a Dungeons and Dragons variant of Middle Earth using this campaign material. It's not very difficult to achieve. So you think converting spells and spell lists, spell references are provided here in the forms of lists. Groupings are related to spells. Each list is a common theme. Normally will have a different but related spell at each level. For instance, knowledge of fire law to the 10th level would result in the acquisition of 10 similar fire-based spells, one of each level from 1 to 10. Whether a spell user could effectively cast these spells will be up to the GM, the system, and the caster's level of degree. So just using that as an example. So if you were to convert and say my firecaster or my wizard is a firecaster, then you would just take a look at all the fire-based spells available in Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, and based on their level, and assign them to your character. So your character has to be X amount of level, just like they would be in that game system, to use those spells. So in truth, you're just using the spell sets, right? And just keep that in mind, right? So we got essence and mentalism and channeling, how to just locks and picks. It says locks and traps found in this module are described in terms of difficulty to unlock or disarm. Subtractions from these are from the rolls representing a person's attempt to find or overcome the device. The difficulty factor may represent a specific column on an action or maneuver chart in roll using, i.e., Rollmaster, or an additional subtraction or modification attempt roll. In any case, the terms are descriptive and will help the GM to figure out the trap. So in the case here, which is a light trap or an easy modification, is a plus 20. Well, it's divide by 5 in order to get it to a D, from a D100 to a D20 system. So, you're talking easy is a plus 4, light is a plus 2, medium is a 0, hard is a negative 2, very hard would be a negative 4, extremely hard would be negative 6, sheer folly, negative 10, absurd, negative 14. I mean, there you have it. Pretty simple, pretty easy, and not very difficult to make the adjustments. So, I like these maps, and most of these books include them. They're smaller than the bigger map that comes, and I have the map for that. I just didn't want to dig it out and lay it out on my table because my camera space and workspace is kind of limited. I've had these maps out in the past, which is why I'm not inclined to get it out today. But this one here is much more detailed, and it is where it allows you to understand where the locations are. Like here's where the Wood-elves tend to be, and there's the orcs, where the shapeshifter, the Barons folk are, the Dale and Dalemen and Iron Hills, and some more detailed stuff on locations of other things. Like here's wolves are quite common, wolves, dragons, wargs, wolves, trolls. I mean, things you could probably want to avoid and stuff like that. Just a lot more detailed information on this map than the bigger color map, just saying. So, also to note, when second edition of Merp came out, they reintroduced Mirkwood as a single module. This is actually one of two, Northern Mirkwood and then Southern Mirkwood. So they're two separate source books. The second edition reprint came out where these were consolidated into one just called Mirkwood, which I believe I've already done a video on. So if you want to go look it up somewhere, it's in there. So introduction to Northern Mirkwood. Follow the old forest roads to the heart of Mirkwood and take the path of Orome and the Elves of the First Age, and you'll find yourself in the deep, dark woods full of game, fish, and berries. How strangely quiet the woods are now. How dreary and threatening since the Shadow of Mordor cast its pall across the land 600 years ago. Only the giant spiders of the forest seem content as they lie in their shadowy lairs, alert for the slightest stir in their sticky, steely webs, etc., etc. Land, an overview, and anybody who's seen the movie, has seen The Hobbit and the travel through Mirkwood, they did a crack job of just how dense and dark and convoluted that huge forest is. It's just the largest standing forest in western Middle Earth, and it just there isn't nothing to compare anywhere in the current timeline. Now the story goes, if you go back to the first age, because Fangorn tells Perry and Pippin that there was a time once that Yanin could walk from blah to blah and never leave the trees, and that was before the second age and Normer, which then the men of the Western East came in and heavily logged western and southwestern Middle Earth to fuel their shipbuilding industry and etc. and so on. So, and then add to the wars of Sauron and Elves and other destruction. This is just like Fangorn. Fangorn and Lothlorien is small outposts of a much vaster forest, where Mirkwood was a forest unto itself, detached from that other forest, yet now is the predominant biggest forest in western Middle Earth. So we got plants and animals, the great eagles, the dragons, the giant spiders, the bears, oh my, the wolves, the flea, and the great plague. And it gives you what happened and how things have, the lowly flea, a massive murder of Mirkwood. Impossible? No, it's true. The chief transmitter of the great plague, from rats to ground squirrels and other rodents to higher animals and men. Common flea caused more suffering and death than any fire-breathing dragon or a dozen colonies of giant spiders. In fact, as the Great Plague hit Mirkwood in 1636, more than half of its inhabitants were struck down. Almost half of those infected survived, and only the cure being proper sanitary measures not generally practiced at that time. Imagine that. Shadow of the forest, inhabitants, the ways of life. Northern Mirkwood is the unstirred melting pot of Middle Earth, nor is a greater variety of folk, beings, creatures, and men than here. Yet their numbers are small and Mirkwood is large. There's room to roam without bumping into a neighbor. Worse than Mirkwood, once a place of light and growth, incandescent animal activities grown dark and dismal. The forest now thick with black nightshade, having fled the Great Plague 4 years ago. Men are returning in numbers to the rich Anduin Valley and the woods and plains of the Rohirrim on the refuge of the great. From the refuges in the Great Mountains. Meanwhile, Trundle's elves and dwarves of the Iron Hills keep low profile unless disturbed, as if swallowed up by the rocky caverns they call home. Even the birds and beasts are wary. Only at Rosgobble, where Ragos protects and cares for them, do the creatures of Mirkwood let loose in full-throated warbles and howls of delight. More detailed information on the Wood-elves. Imagine yourself immortal, undying, ageless, and picture yourself wise as only an immortal is wise, and beautiful and elegant, taller and leaner than men, quicker and quieter too, perfect. You measure the happenings of Middle Earth not in years or decades or even centuries, but in millennia and ages, great chunks of time in which generations of men flow by like a river. while you sit munching limbus and sipping Orome, the cordial Elambris on the classic bank. Yeah, I'm sure that they drink a lot of that in Mirkwood. Imagine, too, that you can speak and sing and make your own enchanting music day in and day out. Okay, yeah, all right. So lots of information on the elves. Elven gifts of language, coming of Thunderl, daily life among the Wood-elves, dwarves, a brief dwarven history, dwarves of the Iron Hills, the Northmen, brief Northman history. That's something of interest that always, when I read The Hobbit years and years ago, and many times I have read The Hobbit almost every year. So I've read it almost 40 odd times now, at least, probably a lot more than that. Because anyway, and I watched Peter Jackson's version of The Hobbit, and we get to Dale, and we get to Dale, which is a ruin at the time. We get to Long Lake, and there's this thriving human community. And it seems like it's just like this large human community in the middle of by the lake in the middle of desolation. What we don't take into account is that there's many smaller villages and nomadic tribes and other towns spread clear out the north, and they're diminished. By the time of the War of the Ring, they're really diminished. They're struggling, and from a lot of let's just say they've fallen backwards instead of advanced. But there were times and points in the history of the Third Age where men were much more numerous and had much larger populations. It's through lots and lots of conflict from the east and the west of the plains of Rohirrim and the orcs in the mountains and the Anduin Vale, the ancestors of Rohirrim, and so on and so forth, that's changed that outlook. In addition, at some point when Earl leads the Rohirrim to the south, where they settle and found Rohan, this removes a large portion of the northern human population out of the northern Anduin Valley, which once again makes it much more diminished. So just keep that in mind. Not that I guess it matters. Brief Northman history, the family tree of the Edain, daily life among the Northmen, other inhabitants, politics and power of Northmen. There's a lot of good information here that's for backstory material. Really doesn't play a lot in the day-to-day campaign of your game, I think, in my opinion. Or where's my opinion is. I'm going to crack this window open here. There's a little airflow in here because I'm feeling a little stuffy. Settlement patterns, including for the elves. Just like here, the princes of Rohirrim, originally that part of Middle Earth stretching east of the Misty Mountains to the river running, have ruled their little principality since the 1200s. Once Gondor had domain over the plains and guarded them with her mighty armies, now the Rohirrim rulers find themselves on their own as its conqueror struggles simply to survive. Back in the 13th century, Viduava, the greatest of these princes, organized the Northmen into a loosely centralized government that worked for a while. However, it seems likely that powerful clans gathered along the vales of Anduin and the Grey Mountains and paid little attention to the self-proclaimed monarch. It is simply not in the nature of the Northmen to submit himself to a higher authority. The Northmen avoid at all, which the the Northmen views government much as he views the plague, something to be avoided at all costs. So they tend to be in smaller groups and prefer it that way. But there have been points in time where they were more concentrated or more advanced than they are. Settlement patterns. Then we got a blueprint of the halls of the Elven Queen. This is a just brief touch on it. There's a whole module or adventure module / source book on the subject, which I've done a video on, and it's worth having in lieu of, or in cahoots with this one, right? They got time together. Terrier Wagger Dorg and Orchy Citadel, actually ruin of a first age Orkhold, blah blah. Sangorring, this is one of them secrets of Northern Mirkwood that doesn't see it in the movies or books, but there's a brief mention in it in the Silmarillion or one of the Lost Tales or something like that, and it's from there. Canon, a beta canon is filled in the blanks. Great Sarngirth The solitary 90-foot spire and glassy igneous rock. I believe this is part of the source of where the enchantment for the river, the enchanted river comes from. Erebor, the Lonely Mountain. This is actually, I really wish they had time to have got to doing a more detailed supplement for Erebor, which, you know, it's sad that they didn't. I don't know if they did in second or third edition version or later incarnations of Merp, but this was the best they had during the years that I was playing it. So this was our go-to for that and Moria. I tapped Moria quite a bit for inspiration whenever I needed to have something to deal with Erebor. So, you know, there's the Holy Karok and why it's holy and what its history is. The secret holes of non-Morsig. This is basically a mountain burial outfit, and there was a scene in The Hobbit where Gandalf investigates supposedly the tombs of the 9 ringwraiths, and which doesn't occur in the books or the novels. That's something that Peter Jackson's writers and people came up with to flesh out the story. But when they first showed it and he was talking about it, this place came to mind, even though it's not the same place, but it could be. Right. Suggestions for adventures in Game Master Age. Adventuring in Northern Rohirrim, the Grey Mountain Adventures, actions of North Grey Peaks, lots of dragons and other things that eat you. Action to High Reaches, action to Withered Hurt. Unless you're a very, very powerful group of people or you're stupid, stay away from here. There's a reason why the dragons are isolated and they don't want to mess with other. They don't. Otherwise, if you think about it, if they all followed Smaug's preference for plunder, the South would have been decimated a long time ago. So just leave them to their own business. The sleeping dragons lie. It's a good adage. Action in the eastern southern foothills, ventures in northern forest, and the Imnufun, which is Mirkwood, mountains of Mirkwood, I think. Actions in the wilder woods, actions in the mountains of Mirkwood, yeah, actions in the river valleys, Long Lake Adventures, a bit more information, a little more detail about what's going on in the area on either side of northern Mirkwood and northern Mirkwood Adventure Open Country. Lots of opportunities. Adventure in Erebor Dale, Lonely Mountain, Dale, the Iron Hills, Cold of the Long Night, the Sagas, Middle of the Iron Hills. So we got Master Military Chart Stats, Beasts of the Northern Wilderness, Master NPC Chart, Dragons, and here you got a list of some pretty potent buggers here. You know, Smaug is considered a 66 level with 636 hit points with an attack of 20, defense bonus of 65. So it's, yeah. So he'd have an attack of +4, and he would have a +8 to his defense. You'd have to figure out his armor class. He's red and gold. Breath is 60 to 120 feet. Actually, there's a source book we have, I think, that has more detailed stats on dragons and other stuff from Middle Earth. Special herbs. Economic tables, items of note, campaign adventure suggestions. Everyday life, orc life, woodman life, wood elf life, Bajar life, the baronies. Excuse me. Trouble at Third Age, Contour in the Candace Drive, Plague of the Beasts Before the Storm, Shadow in the Forest, Dwarves and Smaug, Wayne Riders, Selected Reading, Battle of Five Armies, the End of the Age. There you have it. Lots of for such a small book, there's a lot of information, and some of it's in kind of very small print, so you might need to have some decent reading glasses or a magnifying glass or whatever. But this is classic Middle Earth, classic Merp. You really can build entire campaigns and never play another game without needing anything but this and a set of rules. Just my opinion on that. Till next time, this is Rick, and your seat at the table. Game on.